My name is Walter Edwards. I'm the director of the Humanities Center. I'm delighted to welcome you to this this presentation by the 2016-2017 recipient of the Marlin Williamson's Endowed Distinguished Faculty of Fellows. This is an event which the center is very proud to have, one of our most prestigious events. And first of all, I want to thank the donor of this award. She was Marlin Williamson, who was a distinguished professor in the English department, and then went on to become Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, and then became an associate provost, and then a deputy provost, and then retired as a provost. And in her estate, she endowed this fellowship with $850,000, which allows us to fund one fellowship per year, and then every 3 years we can fund 2 of these fellowships. Also thank the people in the development office, particularly Rachel Paulson, who prospected and arranged for Dr. Williamson to make this very generous endowment. So far we've had 5 recipients. We had Richard Marbach in 2011-2012, Dorothy Appel from Art and Art History in 2012-2013, Jeff Apt, who I'm pleased to say is in the audience, from Art and Art History, together with Lillian Provogak from Linguistics in 2013-2014, Renee Hoogland from the English department in 2014-2015. And I'm delighted to say Tamara Bray from Anthropology, 2015-2016. So please give Tamara a hand. When the fellow gets the award, we allow the fellow 1 year to do some work, and then to display it to the humanities community and to the university at large the fruit of the work so far. And Tamara is going to do that. So that ends my role. What I'm going to do now is to introduce to you the moderator of today's event, who is going to be Tom Killian from the Anthropology Department. Tom is an anthropological archaeologist who focuses on the organization and development of complex societies in the tropical lowlands of Mexico and Central America. His main interest lies in the evolution of ancient agriculture, urbanism, and warfare in those contexts. He has published in the Journal of Field Archaeology, Latin American Antiquity, the Journal of Anthropological Research, and Current Anthropology, among other venues. He has conducted research in the US, Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Peru, on projects supported by the National Science Foundation, the Weiner-Gren Foundation, and Anthropological Research. So you see, Tom is highly qualified to introduce Tamara, who herself is an archaeological anthropologist. So without further ado, I turn the proceedings over to Professor Tom Killian. Please welcome him to the podium with applause.
Thank you very much, Walter. I didn't know that I was going to get such a detailed introduction to the introducer. So, certainly appreciative of that, but wanted to kind of get it going here. So the Marilyn Williamson Award is for not only promising but distinguished research and in the humanities. And I wanted to start by giving you some background on the talk that will demonstrate the research. So I'll start with the facts. Tamara Bray is a professor of anthropology, a research archaeologist, and the past director of the Gordon Groscup Museum of Anthropology at Wayne State. After receiving her doctoral degree from Binghamton in upstate New York, she worked for several years at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History before coming to Wayne in 1995. In 2013, Dr. Bray was named Michigan Distinguished Professor of the Year by the President's Council of State Universities of Michigan. Most recently, she was elected a senior fellow in pre-Columbian studies at Harvard University's Dumbarton Oaks Research Library in Washington, D.C. Very prestigious appointment. That's sort of the star chamber for art historians and archaeologists, where they pick the next crop of fellows. Dr. Bray, Tammy, is an Andean archaeologist who has specialized over the years in the archaeology of northern highland Ecuador and the Inca Empire. Her research focuses on questions of imperial expansion, imperial art and iconography, the agency of objects, and most recently, the subjects of animism and the archaeology of religion. She's published extensively on her research in both Spanish and English, in journals such as World Archaeology, Latin American Antiquity, the Journal of Field Archaeology, Chungara, and the Cambridge Archaeological Journal. She's published several edited volumes as well, including most recently Lenguajes Visuales de los Incas, with a Chilean colleague, Paula Gonzalez, and has contributed chapters to numerous, and I underline numerous, other volumes on interest ranging from the Ecuador Reader, published by Duke University, Religion in the Material World, the University of Southern Illinois Press, the Handbook of South American Archaeology with Plenum, and Drink, Power, and Society in the Andes with the University of Florida. Over the course of what I think can only be called a phenomenal professional career that is to be continued, Dr. Bray has been the recipient of numerous fellowships and research grants awarded by some of the most prestigious humanities and social science institutions in the country and internationally, including the National Endowment for the Humanities, the American Philosophical Society, the School for Advanced Research, Dumbarton Oaks, Fulbright, the National Science Foundation, the Wenner-Gren Foundation for Anthropological Research, and the Center for Advanced Study of the Visual Arts at the National Gallery. Her penultimate research project focused on the site of Inca Caranqui, located on the imperial frontier in the northern highland Ecuador. Archaeological investigations at the site were supported by a Wenner-Gren, a 3-year collaborative research grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and a research and explorers grant from the National Geographic Society. Following in the very footsteps of Inca Yupanqui and Atahualpa, Tammy has recently moved south to the Titicaca Basin, Bolivia. And that's what she'll be talking to us about today. So those are some of the facts. That's not a comprehensive list. I wouldn't drag you through that, but it's a pretty impressive list. Tammy and I have been friends and colleagues for a long time. I think we met in a hallway at the National Museum some 30 odd years ago now, just before we started digging into the whole issue of repatriation. And for a while, we worked very close on that project. And so I've gotten to know her. We seem to end up working at the same places. Like the landscape she studies, I think of Tammy as an embodied force in nature. I'm not kidding. The intensity and tenacity with which she approaches her work is only surpassed by her devotion and her loyalty to the people and the places that she studies. She's been going back to the Andes, either be it Ecuador or elsewhere, for a long time now. She's established a true presence in that field and in that area of the world. I'd like to present Professor Tamara Bray for her talk. Sorry. Do that.
Okay. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate the turnout, and I look forward to talking with you about my most recent project. And so it's a pleasure to be able to share with you some of the preliminary findings from our archaeological field research in Bolivia this past summer, and some of the theoretical ideas that have guided these investigations. And as Walter noted, this project was supported in part by the Marilyn Williamson Distinguished Faculty Fellowship that I was awarded last year by the Humanities Center. And it's a really very generous award that was made possible by a very generous woman who herself was formerly recognized, as Walter noted, as a distinguished professor of the university by the Board of Regents. And given that my research focuses on the Inca, I think it's notable that one of Provost Williamson's last achievements, of which she was quite proud, was making it to Machu Picchu in 2009 at the age of 81. And Machu Picchu itself has become in itself a kind of a modern day Mecca for many people in its own right, its own kind of sacred site. I also want to offer my sincere thanks to my friend and colleague, Dr. Walter Edwards, who provides strong and steady leadership at the Humanities Center for at least as long as I've been here, which is now going on a long time, as Tom has indicated. And Walter's really the epitome of graciousness and inclusiveness and effective organization. And I think we all owe him a great debt of gratitude for so ably steering the ship of the humanities on the campus. And I'd also like to thank my good friend and colleague, Tom Killian, for agreeing to act as my moderator and interlocutor today. Dr. Killian's research also at times has taken landscapes as the object of study. And so I look forward to comparing ideas with him after the more formal component of my talk today. And thereafter taking any kind of questions or comments that you might like to pose as well after I go through some of this stuff. And also thanks Tom for the very kind introduction. Yeah, okay, that's all right. I'll get it later. Wait, let me see. I need something there. Yeah, maybe I should get it now.
Yeah, maybe you should.
You have to swap papers here.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so what I'd like to do in my talk today is to first begin with a brief introduction to my project and some of the central themes that we're pursuing, and then provide some background information on Indian archaeology and religious traditions to help place the site of Copacabana in historical and regional context, and then turn to some of the preliminary results of our investigations of the Inca occupation of Copacabana that we encountered last summer, and a discussion of how these findings relate to the research questions that are posed. And so the modest town of Copacabana, which you're looking at here, do the lights go down any farther? I'm not sure. Is this it, kind of? No, they could be more dramatic if it was darker, but they'll suffice, I suppose. So this is the modest town of Copacabana. The photo's taken from a hill located to the south, so we're looking down on it, and I want to take note of that pointy peak up in the upper right-hand side, Cerro Calvario, and the beautiful Lake Titicaca, which figures in this story as well. And Copacabana has it's another view, this view taken from the pointy peak of Calvario Hill. And Copacabana has a modern-day population of about 6,000 people, but it's been a pilgrimage destination and a sanctuary of extraordinary reverence for at least the past 2,500 years, from the earliest formative times until the present. And it remains today the holy place of the patroness of Bolivia, the Virgin of Copacabana, to whom a church was dedicated in the late 16th century. And as a modern-day Catholic holy site, it continues to draw throngs of pilgrims from throughout Bolivia and the Altiplano region twice a year, in both August and February. Copacabana is situated on the Bolivian side of a rugged peninsula of the same name at the southern end of Lake Titicaca. And so here you're looking at the rugged peninsula. And Lake Titicaca is actually the highest navigable body of fresh water in the world. It's situated at 3,800 meters above sea level. So we were really high up there. And it's rather cold a lot of the time. And so Titicaca was a profoundly important feature of the place world of traditional Andean peoples. And I'm using this term place world following Edward Casey to refer to a world that's not only perceived or conceived, but also actively lived and receptively experienced. The site of Copacabana, together with the islands of the sun and the moon, formerly comprised one of the most sacred ceremonial complexes in the Inca Empire, second in importance only to the Inca capital of Cusco itself. My study focuses on the nature of the Inca engagement with this powerful locale, working from the notion that significant places are continuously made and remade through the agency of doings, be such doings spoken, performed, or materialized. The study aims to address whether the imperial Inca approach to making and engaging the sacred in the particular context of Copacabana differed significantly from earlier forms of engagements and doings at the site. Following this approach, I hope to gain insights into the ways in which topographies of the sacred are constructed, how attachments to place are formed and transformed over time, and how power, place, and identity are materially and mutually constituted. So let me say a few more words about the theoretical orientation of my study here. I'm taking Keith Basso's work as a point of departure to some extent and for inspiration. And in his classic study of Western Apache place names, okay, sorry, not loud enough?
No.
Okay. He finds that history and wisdom was located in places, the specific meanings and significance of which were, quote, extremely personal, consistently subjective, and thus highly variable. For these and other reasons, he wrote, Apache history is history without authorities, with all narrated place worlds, provided they seem plausible, considered equally valuable, or equally valid, I should say. The present study seeks to investigate whether such, quote, democratic relations with places on the landscape through which people literally constructed their social identities and personal morals may have been co-opted or transformed by emerging imperial powers in the context of the late pre-Columbian Andes. My orientation towards place in this study, is thus towards viewing it as an event rather than as an ontological thing. The significance and meanings of places as I'm approaching them, being necessarily and continuously made and remade through social practice. And here, what you're viewing is the archaeologists involved in a ritual activity of offering and placemaking prior to our commencement of excavations at the site. So approaching place as something performed and practiced allows for both temporality and creative possibility in thinking about the constitutive co-ingredients of identity, place, and power. Given this remit, the main objective of the research initiated last year in Copacabana was to ascertain the nature of imperial Inca engagement with this key site and consider how this engagement furthered the Inca's imperial ambitions. My working hypothesis is that the state both coveted and required the power of this historically potent place, but had to re-engineer had to engineer concrete changes so as to reconfigure it in less local, less subjective, and more exclusive terms. In addition to emphasizing the materiality of Inca ritual practice and engagement in the constitution of the sacred here, the approach I've adopted is also biographical, insofar as I ultimately intend to foreground the temporality of Copacabana as a sacred place by comparing the Inca component to both earlier and later manifestations of social and ritual activity at the site. So now I'll move to the second section of my paper, which seeks to put for you Copacabana into historical and regional context. And so the first person to report on the nature of the imperial Inca presence in Copacabana was the Augustinian friar Alonso Ramos Gavilan, who prepared a document on the miracles performed by the Virgin of Copacabana that was published in 1621. By his and others' accounts, Copacabana had functioned as a state-sponsored pilgrimage center during Inca times and as a pilgrimage center during Inca times and as a critical point of purification for sojourners en route to the sacred island of Titicaca, which is the island that's today known as the Island of the Sun. Ramos Gavilan mentions in his text that Copacabana itself had previously had an important idol, or waka, made of colorful blue stone. That's directly from his manuscript, consisting of only a disembodied human face, lacking feet and hands. This specific idol that Ramos Gavilan was mentioning no longer survives, or at least if it does, we have no knowledge of it. But we can imagine from the description that it may have in some way resembled the image on this formative period stone tablet that's today housed in the Berlin Museum of Ethnology, although this particular example happens to have feet. The original, undoubtedly pre-Incaic waka of Copacabana was replaced in the late 16th century by a carved statue of the Virgin Mary, which is believed to perform miracles. The Virgin of Copacabana is represented here in syncretic fashion as the Andean Pachamama, or the Andean Mother Earth in the form of a mountain. As mentioned above, Our Lady of Copacabana still draws thousands of pilgrims on a biannual basis, few of whom are likely aware of the ritual heritage and power of this place that they themselves help to perpetuate. So this is a good place to consider a few key Andean concepts relating to my study. First of all, wakas. In the Andean realm, people recognize many features of the natural world as animate entities, imbued with considerable power. Such entities were known as waka, a term that we can gloss as sacred thing. In one early 17th century description, the mestizo author El Inca Garcilaso de la Vega noted that such things as rocks, great stones, or trees, figures of men, figures of birds, animals, and places built, such as temples, sepulchres, and corners of houses, were all examples of Andean waka. Based on the early extirpators of idolatry, their reports, the extirpators in the Andes, nearly every indigenous community had at least one patron waka, often a landscape feature, such as a rock, a spring, or a cave, that was devoutly revered by its local constituency and upon which the community depended for its well-being. The close personal connections between people and their waka in the Andes recalls the kind of democratic or egalitarian relationship with the landscape described by Basso for the Western Apache. My idea in this study is that the institutionalization of specific sacred locales around the empire, such as that of Copacabana, as well as a few of the other famously sacred Inca sites, such as Pachacamac, which is on the coast near Lima, Peru, Catequil, which is in the northern Andean highlands, and Guanacaure, which is just a hill just outside of Cusco, that it was a key strategy of the new imperial lords of the empire that they used for the creation and control of new social and political identities. So, let's see. And in this slide, you see what we might construe as a physical appropriation of local wakas on the part of the Inca state, building architectural houses that physically enclosed or encapsulated. Maybe we can think of domesticating, or maybe we can think of constraining, or maybe even like capturing, but demarcating these landscape features in such a way that signified that Inca were associated with them. Another important concept in this study involves the fact that Andean peoples tend to think of the sacred as concrete and not as some kind of abstraction. So they don't think about it the way that we typically in the West, we think about the sacred as some abstraction, some abstract notion. Rather, for Indian peoples, it was the sacred is worldly, it's present, it's embodied. And so Andean wakas were and very much are still concrete material phenomena and not bodiless abstract notions. Understanding wakas as physical embodiments of exceptional power rather than as representations of otherworldly beings highlights the importance of their materiality, which is what in turn allowed them to be efficacious in the world and what enabled their participation in the networks of relations that comprise the social and political worlds of Indian peoples. And so in this image, you see the Inca king speaking directly with some wakas, and these are probably like mountain or stone features, and the way that the animacy of these landscape features or entities was communicated to a Western audience was through the anthropomorphization of them. So here you see these are mountains that have human bodies, I think, to communicate the fact that they were non-human persons. So what makes a place sacred? The physical landscape is certainly one of the determining factors in the numinous power of a place. There are places on the landscape such as lofty peaks, gushing springs, groves of sequoias, or openings to the underworld that arouse deep emotions in people. But sacred space does not exist a priori. Rather, it's the outcome of past and present interactions among humans, landscape features, architecture, and objects. The performance of ritual, which is fundamentally repeated and embodied action, is key to tapping into or creating the power of such numinous places. Ritual, which emphasizes, with its emphasis on the centering of attention, memory, and repetition, is one of the best means of creating group identity and ensuring continuity of community. In this Morua illustration, what you're looking at here is two individuals who are from two different ethnic groups from the southern part of the empire, making ritual offerings to their waka. And they're offering, the Muro kind of labels this stuff for us, so they're offering coca leaf and alpaca. And interestingly, I think, this particular waka is labeled Titicaca. So this is the local Titicaca waka that Muro happens to be illustrating. The making of regular offerings was and is the typical way in which Andean peoples engaged with their sacred places, or their waka. A focus on the emplacement of ritual and how space shapes actions and frames experience highlights the material dimensions of the numinous and opens the way for archaeological investigation. So these are the ideas that have structured the approach we've taken to the archaeological investigation of the Inca presence in Copacabana. And again, what we're particularly concerned with here is how the imperial state went about appropriating, engaging with, and or reconfiguring pre-existing sacred space for its own political ends. So in this final section, I want to show you some of what we found this summer and introduce you to some of the archaeology of Copacabana. And here, the vestiges of the imperial Inca presence are found both within and on the outskirts of the modern town of Copacabana. For the most part, the imperial Inca remains consist of various sets of carved boulders, outcrops, and stone features, and they're together oftentimes with remnants of architectural structures, buildings, as well as lots of Inca artifacts. So the carved landscape elements, as you see here, were a hallmark of the imperial Inca presence throughout the Andean region. In their signature style, the Inca modified natural boulders and outcrops to create flat, shelf-like surfaces and voids within the mass of the rock itself. Such treatment of stone is found throughout the empire, and it's diagnostic of imperial claims to a given territory. Given that metallurgically, the Inca only worked with softer metals, such as gold or silver, these features, these carved rocks, they were undoubtedly made, because this is always a question people want to know, how do they make these? They were undoubtedly made with just harder hammer stones and chisel stones, harder stone chisels and hammers. And they were probably subsequently further abraded through the use of sand and water. And the angles on these things are, perfect 90 degrees. It's they're really amazing features. And while they're often referred to as seats or as thrones, it's equally possible to think that these features may have served as altars or as emplacements for offerings. And notably, Copacabana contains the largest number of these Inca-style carved stones anywhere in the empire outside of Cusco, which undoubtedly indicates the importance of this site within the imperial geography. Inca period features and remains in Copacabana comprise 4 discrete clusters or sectors. But the focus of our research this past summer was on the largest of these, which is located on the east side of the town of Copacabana and is known as Intimkala, which translates directly or literally as naked sun in Quechua. Intimkala contains the highest density of extant Inca features in Copacabana. And so, here's a number of these carved stones. You see these carved seats here. Here's the basilica, and here again is Cerro Calvario, just so for orientation and reference. And within this open area, it's approximately 1/2 hectare in size, there's some 17 of these large carved stones and outcrops, as well as a natural spring and the remains of various Inca structures and canals. And we selected Intimkala as the most logical area to begin our study due to its proximity to the basilica, because local authorities are interested in developing a site museum here, And because even though the property is municipally owned, it's still threatened by unauthorized urban development. One of our basic working assumptions in focusing on this area is that the Shrine of the Virgin of Copacabana and the Basilica, which I circled there in red, which is located in the center of the town of Copacabana, likely occupies the site of the original Waka of Copacabana. I think this hypothesis is justified given what we know of Spanish treatment of other Inca sacred sites around the empire, where colonial churches were erected directly on top of Inca temples. And in fact, this is a common strategy or tactic of conquering powers the world over, from the Romans to the Inca themselves also engaged in this kind of activity. Additionally, Ramos Gavilan, back in 1621, wrote that, quote, "Where today the convent stands, one can still see a few remnants of the famous buildings of cut stone, which was a house dedicated to the sun." And he's talking about an Inca temple there. And while we eventually hope to convince the church authorities to let us do some archaeology inside the sanctuary to verify this hypothesis, we believe it's feasible to proceed with this assumption for the time being. And having an idea of the location of the principal Waka of Copacabana is important to the analysis, our analysis of the distribution and orientation of Inca and earlier cultural materials and remains at the site. So archaeological investigations at Intimkala this past summer were undertaken in collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Sergio Chavez of Central Michigan University, Bolivian archaeologist Marta Alejo, as well as several current and former students from Wayne State, including Aaron Okenen, who happened to make it here today, so I'm really happy to see Aaron. I haven't seen him since we got stuck in the airport trying to leave Bolivia back in July. Also Stasha Chavez, who's a doctoral student in our department, whose dissertation work is focusing on the materials from earlier Tiwanaku period in Copacabana. Also Amy Kroll, who's another of our alumna, as well as a student from Central Michigan, another student from Denver University, as well as a large contingent of local Aymara people from Copacabana, who used to gather around here. This was one of our coldest days, so you can see snow on. This is July, and the snow in the background. It was a tough call that day, whether we should stay or whether we should go. And I think we ended up going right there. So anyway, we initiated our excavations, our investigations at the site by first generating a topographic map of the area, and then also conducting a geophysical survey using ground-penetrating radar to probe for subsurface features. While we were hopeful that the remote sensing equipment would help us easily identify subsurface features, things didn't work out as planned. Various anomalies detected by radar did not prove to be cultural upon ground proofing via excavation, and other features later discovered in excavations were missed by the device. So we attribute the poor results to the shallowness of the cultural deposits that we eventually did uncover. Most archaeological remains at this site were found no more than 10 to 15 centimeters below surface, and also the bedrock was really quite shallow. So we were hitting bedrock at like 50 to 60 centimeters below surface. After a bit of this, we subsequently shifted to judgmental sampling, and had much greater luck with respect to finding evidence of the Inca presence and ritual usage of the site. So the principal archaeological features that we found this summer, in addition to the incredible carved stones which drew us there in the first place, include wall foundations, stone-lined canals, several dense midden deposits of Inca trash, and several burials. And this is just a little sampling of some of the stuff we uncovered in excavations. With respect to artifacts, we recovered large amounts of Inca pottery, faunal remains, principally camelid or llama and alpaca, and as well as some spindle whorls, tupu pins, which are tupu pins here, located here. These are copper objects that are used to close women's shawls. They go like this. So these are typically female artifacts, as are, here you see a couple spindle whorls. These are also usually construed as female objects. And then lots and lots of beautiful decorated pottery. Given that the analysis of archaeologically excavated material typically takes several years, we're only in the very, very early stages of organizing and interpreting our data. But what I can do here in just the next few minutes is give you a very brief overview of the features that we found, the types of analyses that we're pursuing, and what the preliminary data might potentially suggest with respect to the research questions posed. So first, with the stone wall foundations that we uncovered were quite substantial and are generally associated with the carved stones on the western edge of the site. These walls are constructed in typical Inca fashion, which involves the use of double kind of semi-worked blocks. Oftentimes these walls will have like a rubble core fill, and these are substantial walls. They're usually like 60 to 80 centimeters in width. So we uncovered the wall foundations of one really large structure here. I outlined it for you so you can make a better sense of it. But these are stone wall foundations associated with this carved Inca stone. That structure is about 6 by 9 meters in size, and this other little one was about 2 by 2 meters in size. We found two of those little ones and one big one. Associated with these little structures were this cobblestone pavement. It was patchy, but it was still present in some areas of the site, and particularly in association with these smaller structures. And this kind of cobblestone pavement seems to be a feature found at other Inca sacred locales throughout the empire too, so we're going to be following up on that. So this is the site of Copacabana, which is way far north in the northern highlands of Peru. Interestingly, with respect to the three relatively intact structures, we find that their long axes are all essentially parallel. They're all within a couple degrees orientation of one another, on about 302 or 305 degrees, so like northeast. And they kind of orient themselves to the basilica in the town center, or to the impressive Cerro Calvario that I've pointed out to you, that pointy peak. So either one of these features, the pointy hill or the spot where the modern day basilica is, may have comprised the locale of the originary Huacas of Copacabana. Another interesting observation concerns the association of the structures with the carved stones. So these are just kind of schematic representations of the carved stones, but you can again see how they're maybe clustered around, they may be encompassing, somehow they're enclosing, demarcating these important landscape entities. As at many imperial Inca sites across the empire, a concern with water and its flow through and around architectural elements appears to have been important in Intimkala. In addition to the natural spring, which is located, well, it's that blue spot. There you go. So it's located there. We found evidence of several canals, both associated with the carved stone outcrops and as you can see here. So this is a carved stone canal, a stone line canal associated with this roca one that proceeds across to some other stones over here. As well as, we also had, let me just see here, mixed up now. We also had a canal, a stone line canal in the center of the site. So water's being moved around this site, importantly. Also, a number of these carved stone outcrops have carved or grooved channels in them for obviously the movement, of liquid, be it water, which I don't know if it be water, but maybe chicha, which is corned beer, maybe blood, maybe urine. Some kind of, liquid is being manipulated in association with these rocks. The quantity and the diversity of the imperial Inca pottery that we found at Intimkala this past summer speaks to the cosmopolitan nature of the site and ritual participation here, as well as the kind of activities that took place here. So we've just preliminarily observed a number of different styles and paste types in the field. that suggests that these fine wares may have been coming from different areas of different regions. And we're pursuing this investigation of where this stuff comes from via neutron activation analysis with a colleague out at Oregon State University, where they have a nuclear reactor. And so we'll be hoping for some interesting results soon enough, maybe 6 months or so. We'll also be doing further kind of quantitative and stylistic analyses to get a better sense of what we have and where the different styles are also indicative potentially of different regions. And the overall quantity of vessels that we found here, as well as the kinds of vessels, which are primarily these big chicha jars and big shallow plates, is and the fact that it's so highly decorated, they're so highly decorated, points to large-scale feasting at this site. So our preliminary interpretation of feasting activities taking place here are also supported by the fact that we found lots of burned camelid bone, camelids or llamas and alpacas, being sacrificed and then cooked and eaten. So feasting with the wakas and the provision of offerings to the wakas were two key modes of interaction of Andean people with their sacred spaces. And finally, as per the old adage in archaeology that you always find the best stuff on the last day, we encountered several Inca burials as well as the densest midden of Inca trash in the final days of excavation last summer. And so here you're looking at, I don't know if you can see very well, but this is a darker Inca midden that's capping what proved to be a kind of a cyst burial. And tons and tons of pottery, carbon, faunal remains came out of that Inca midden, so like maybe a trash dump, feasting trash dump. Also associated with a couple of these burials were chupu pins and spindle whorls, like you see here. And I can't say anything more about the burials. Most of the human remains were disintegrated, and I don't know what else we'll be able to do with those, and we haven't really started to think about those yet. But I just have one more thing that I might be able to share with you about how we're proceeding to try to address our research questions regarding how the imperial state went about appropriating the power of sacred places, by showing you some very preliminary results with respect to how we're using digital photography of site features and photogrammetric software, and specifically Agisoft, to generate 3D models of carved stones. And let's see, yeah, so I can't work it from here, but maybe Bo Cromberg has been helping me, and he could probably, will you come manipulate the okay. Bo Cromberg actually has done it all. Beyond helping me. So we haven't got this completed yet, but just to give you a sense of what we're hoping, you can do this with just photographs, and we're hoping to put these, recreate the landscape in 3 dimensions, and then be able to investigate the orientations of these carved seats or altars vis-a-vis one another in terms of like intervisibility, and also with respect to macro features on the landscape. So orientations towards hills on the horizon, towards points on the lake, and things like that. So these are cool, and this is the fruits of what our students are teaching themselves in the archaeology lab. And, let's see here. Maybe we'll just look at one if it takes so long to load.
Yeah. I also put like the pictures of the walls up there.
Oh, cool, yeah. So this is that Roca 1, which has a lot of voids and carvings on it, and this is the Inca Stonewall foundation that we excavated, and you can see the associations, and we'll be able to investigate the orientations a little bit better and how these things relate to one another. So can you spin it?
It's still loading.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Pretty cool, huh? And it's really, the resolution is super fine. I don't know why it's not showing.
How big is it?
It's still loading.
How big is it? It's about maybe 5 meters, maybe 4 meters by 3 meters bulk. And all of these rocks, they have carvings all, they're all over the place. They're on the top, they're on the sides, they're, at ground level. They're interesting. They try to figure out something more about them than we currently understand. And while it's loading, just in the interest of time, I think I'll just say a few words in conclusion. We initiated the Copacabana project to investigate the notion that ritual practice and performance at this important Inca site and other sacred locales around the empire was critical to the political project of creating an imperial citizenry and authorizing an imperial elite. Taking an archaeological perspective on the significance of place and placemaking in the context of a specific sacred locale offers the opportunity to approach these questions both temporally and materially from a situated topographic point. It's anticipated that the proposed research will provide insights not only into how sacred spaces and places are made and potentially differentially engaged with through time, but also how they figure in the personal and political calculus of different cultural actors. The data generated on the Inca occupation of Copacabana during this first field season will form the basis for future comparative research with respect to how earlier and subsequent indigenous Andean populations materially engaged with this sacred site. As we progress with our analyses and interpretations, I anticipate that the archaeological evidence from Copacabana will advance new directions for research at other imperial sites and new understandings of the relation between sacred sites, super-regional sanctuaries, and the growth of super-regional political power. So that's it. Thank you very much, and maybe we'll get to see something. Thanks, Paul. And I welcome any questions, but Dr. Killian was going to interrogate me.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm supposedly the moderator, and I don't, look at this group here, and I get a little intimidated about it. I can moderate anything. But I thought I'd start to get the conversation rolling by asking a question, and then maybe you could chime in or put forward your own perspectives on the presentation. But what I thought I'd do is ask Tammy to begin with a little bit of an idea that's suggested by the images you showed us tonight, is the notion of accumulation. Mm-hmm. And the way that things accumulate in the archaeological record. So for what I mean by accumulation, piles of stuff, heaps of junk, and ideas like that. We sort of have this idea of the archaeological record being like an onion. And we go back in time, peeling away one instance of the past after another. But of course, it doesn't work like that at all. It's hardly like that at all. It's much more confused and jumbled. And one of the ideas that came to my mind as I'm looking at your pictures is the wakas. And I suppose they're wakas from earlier time periods than the Inca. I'm sure there are in the Titicaca Basin,
oh, yeah.
But we sort of think of the landscape as being an accumulated feature, having stuff from different time periods. So when we look at it from the present, what we see is what's going on around us in our own world, and what we see is going on at bits and pieces of the past. Mm-hmm. And I kind of liken it to what the empire is doing or experiencing itself, going from one place to another and sort of dominating the accumulation of other things, in some cases to basically make use or legitimate itself by drawing in earlier sacred places into their new hegemony. And I thought maybe that might be an interesting thing to start talking about or conversing over, is the nature of accumulation, both as a kind of physical aspect of the landscape that we see, but also in a little bit in contradiction to the notion of the great organization of the empire. Maybe a lot of the, quote, organization of the empire was sort of stumbling upon other things that it makes use of.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe you, with your experience looking at this
Yeah.
larger entity, you could talk to us about that a little.
Yeah, I think the idea of accumulation is an interesting one. And I view this place, Copacabana, I mean, I was also thinking about it in terms of like density, you know, so you think about things accruing to a place, and we can think maybe about dense places on the landscape. And I think this is one, and I think there are a number of other ones that the Inca knew about. I mean, like I said at the beginning, Titicaca has long been the center of the place world of the Andean peoples. And Tiwanaku, which I didn't go into talking about, but this Tiwanaku peoples had an enormous megalithic site on the south side of the lake. The Inca knew about that, and there's almost like there's new kind of genetic evidence to suggest that peoples from Tiwanaku migrated to Cuzco. And the Titicaca area was one of the first places that the Inca went to conquer. And they undoubtedly knew of the ritual significance of this place. And I do think that a key part of, you know, the state strategy for co-opting local ethnic groups, remember, you know, these are just like individual ethnic groups scattered across the landscape with their own languages, their own cultural customs and traditions, and how the Inca went about forging this empire out of, you know, this mosaic of different peoples. I think that this co-optation of these important dense places on the landscape was probably a key feature, key aspect of statecraft. Andy?
This is really interesting to me because as I was listening to you talk about controlling the flow of water, like precision carvings of stone and these like dense landscapes, I'm thinking about my own work in sort of France and the history of landscape and power in France, and like I immediately started thinking about like the Versailles Gardens, which is this very dense landscape that, you know, other like art historians have analyzed as making a kind of spectacle of symmetry.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, the strategic showing off of symmetry, like by carving hedges and making trees look exactly like, even though they're natural objects, as like a display of power.
Right.
And people have often analyzed that as this part of this very Eurocentric worldview that separated nature and culture, and power was demonstrated by showing our mastery over nature by carving trees perfectly.
Yeah.
So if you look at this kind of imposition of symmetry on a landscape, you're in a New World context, but it's an empire. And I'm wondering, like, is there any kind of understanding of cosmology along those lines about control and power and nature?
Yeah, there's the Inca were kind of obsessed with stone, I think, you know, and I view the way they, you know, there's so many, I could show you thousands of pictures of where the Inca made their mark on the landscape through this, you know, activity of carving these features, and it's like putting your thumbprint, I think, and it's a way perhaps of marrying nature culture, but I don't even know that we should apply that divide necessarily to non-Western peoples, and there's lots of it. Like, has anybody ever been to Machu Picchu or any other Inca sites? A couple people, yeah. Well, in a lot of places, you will see that they carved the bedrock, like they carved bedding places for stones. And so they married the bedrock with the architectural feature. So it's like a natural outgrowth, like Inca architecture is a natural outgrowth from the soil itself or from the bedrock. And that's an interesting point that you raise about the parallels between. Yeah. Jeff?
I have a question about demarcation. It seems to me fascinating that with the smaller examples that you gave of demarcation, where the Waka may have been a not terribly large stone, but one in fact that you could demarcate by building a wall around it, that it seemed to be, the implication is that it needed to be distinguished from other comparable kinds of stones in the landscape, which there would have been many, I assume. The question that I have is about the scaling of this demarcation, because talking about Machu Picchu, it seems to me that there were these kinds of stone carvings at a long distance from Machu Picchu.
Yeah,
you know, like kind of in the surrounding, almost like Middle Eastern boundary stones.
yeah.
And so, I mean, did they, so like, for example, the stone that you were showing, the earlier one that has a sort of complex
Yeah.
set of shells.
Can we
carvings.
go back to that? 'Cause I think these are really interesting. I think just maybe escape.
I think that one's actually probably loaded now. But
Is that you?
Not me.
Oh.
Alarms aren't silenced on my phone.
But anyway, I know what she,
So, yeah, I mean, would this have, I mean, I'm thinking back to the photograph that
Right.
you showed and the other significant
Yeah.
places in there.
Yeah.
Would this in fact itself have had kind of demarcation for the site?
these stones, they're all clustered. Like they're all clustered. The area is a slightly raised, I mean, potentially it's a created platform. It's a built platform, not entirely convinced of that yet, but these are the boundaries of this potential platform, these here. So this open lot is about 85 by 60 meters. And for whatever reason, these stones are clustered right in the center on the western edge. And, but I thought more what we were talking about was maybe like, I think these are cool because the Inca didn't even necessarily need to modify the stones. These are unmodified rocks. There's no carvings on these rocks. Yeah, they're enclosed in an architectural unit.
Well, that would have been the reason for demarcating them because they weren't otherwise necessarily distinguished.
They weren't, but why not? I mean, they could have certainly done it, you know.
Right.
They had the skills. So, and you know, nobody's going to live in that building. That building is like made for this rock, you know. So it's an odd thing the way they related to their. It's not odd. It's just we don't understand it entirely. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for this, Tammy. Thinking about your reference to Basso and the way that sort of historical consciousness or memory and authority may or may not be inscribed on the landscape. I mean, to what extent is what we see in Inca imperial rule, is this an imposition of a different form of historical consciousness, one, I guess, associated with a more authoritarian or control-oriented phenomenon? And then to what degree do we see in the post-Inca a return to a more, democratic is probably the wrong word, but a more open form of historical consciousness associated with the Wakas? And how does that bear on the current use of Copacabana today?
Yeah, after the decapitation of the Inca, I think they certainly never achieved the complete, you know, transformation of the Indian peoples to their way of thinking. I mean, they basically imposed the sun as the, you know, overlayer of their cosmological, you know, their religious structure. But all the local folks could keep their own wakas. I mean, their wakas were essential to them, and there's documentation about how when the Inca moved people around the landscape, they would take pieces of their waka. You know, they could either take a piece of the actual rock, or they could take a cloth that had been overlain on the rock to the new place, and you know, so their wakas were like motile. They were mobile, and they moved with the people, and they were essential, I think, to the people. And so I don't think that was ever entirely eradicated. And when the Spaniards, you know, built the shrine to the, I mean, it's a very complex and interesting history here because it was actually a member of the Inca family that carved the first Virgin of Copacabana. You know, so here's an Indian person, you know, that's wanting to, you know, demonstrate his new devotion to this new religion, Christianity. And you know, along the way, when he's carrying it from place to place, I guess it performs miracles. And the Christian church eventually recognizes that, and they undoubtedly situated it, I think, right where the original stone waka of the Copacabana people would have been. And then they build the basilica, or the church, and it becomes a basilica. And so I think, you know, one of the points I was making was that these places, they don't exist in a vacuum, these sacred places. They have to be brought into, you know, they have to be performed, essentially. And I think that performance is still ongoing in many parts of the Andes, especially in terms of offerings to local wakas. For instance, at the site we were working at, there had been a llama sacrifice around the spring. We didn't dig over there, that would have been really a bad idea. But the people that hung out with us told us that. And as you know, in other instances in our excavations, we encountered little offerings. So I think, you know, this place is still being performed as a sacred place. And I don't know if that really answers your question, so. Yeah, what's it?
Yeah, in your book on wakas, you make the point that wakas were conceived as non-human persons. Could you elaborate? Have we found anything more about what kind of non-human person the wakas were? I mean, were they just all kinds, or were there like specific kinds?
Well, I think there was all kinds, given what the extirpators of idolatry tell us. I mean, they could range from anything from like a little pebble that somebody found to a snow-capped peak, to, you know, an upright stone in a field, as well as little human-made things as well. So there was a whole variety of things, and I think the way that something is recognized as a waka has to do with whether someone experienced it as some kind of powerful entity. So it's, you know, I mean, there's a famous quote in Irving Hollowell's study from the Ojibwa in northern Michigan and Ontario that yes, rocks can be wakas. They don't call them wakas, but yes, rocks can be sacred objects, sacred entities, human, you know, non-human persons. But not every rock is a non-human person. And the way that his informants described it to him was that, well, my grandfather told me that rock is a person. You know, it's a grandfather rock or whatever. And so I think it's all about the interaction and the fact that these entities, and you know, we're looking at a Western representation of how these things were construed. These are, you know, lithified ancestors maybe. But they, you know, people, one of the things that the chroniclers say is that people regularly talked with or communicated with their wakas. So the ability, you know, the verbalization was an important thing. A lot of the sites, the important Inca sites, they're oracle sites. So it's important, this communicative ability. These entities were understood to, you know, to be responsible for the well-being of the community. In the Andes, reciprocity is a huge thing, where, you know, if the community makes offerings to their ancestral waka, that waka is going to make sure that they're okay. So it's an interactive thing. These entities are involved as non-human persons in kin relations, I think, with people. I don't know if that answers anything.
Yeah.
We'll elaborate a little bit. Anything else? Jessica?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tamara. This is fascinating. I have a question about, it's maybe too early to ask, but I was really curious about the particular objects in the excavation that you identified as signifying women or female identity. And so I was curious if you could speak to how gender features in, or how you're thinking of gender featuring in the construction or performance of the place world.
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't thought too much about it. I mean, just that we can say that these burials would certainly have been female burials. But, you know, the one was shown capped by the Inca midden deposit. So I think there's only like 3 or 4 of these. And we haven't really started analyzing them yet. But I think if we could get at gender, and you can, you know, there's lots you can do with regard to serving, you know, feastware, who does the serving at Inca parties? It's women. Who makes the chicha? It's women. Clearly, women were integral in the feasting activities, and yeah, and they're also, you know, essential. You know, complementarity is a huge thing in the Andes. So I'm sure you couldn't have had a party without, you know, the significance of women in it. So yeah, it's for future, you know, discussion. Yeah. Anything else? One more? Okay, Karen. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Tammy. It was really a terrific presentation. I'm really interested, you mentioned that this site or this space is in the process of sort of transitioning to sort of an area that's recognized by the state in an official capacity as being sacred. Like it's.
You mean the Bolivian state, or?
Yeah, or I'm not sure. Did I understand that? Like that it's going to become like a museum?
It is. The Virgin of Copacabana is the patroness.
Oh, okay.
I mean, she's the patron Virgin of Bolivia.
Oh, okay.
She's very important, you know? And really, like, that little town, it is inundated with people twice a year. Like, thousands of people come.
And like across time has been the case, obviously, right? You mentioned.
That's what I would imagine, you know, but I wonder, like, how exclusive the Inca were with regard, you know, once they kind of appropriated it, how exclusive they were about, you know, access to this waka. And I think by comparing, like, there's Tiwanaku materials there as well. By comparing kind of spatial distributions of stuff, we might be able to get some kind of handle on that.
That's what's the relationship? Thank you. What's the relationship of the people the indigenous people who live in the community now, to like the digs, like to what's going on? Has that changed across time?
They're very possessive.
Okay.
Yeah, and they worked very closely. They kept a very close eye on us.
Okay.
We paid them to work with us. And they want their stuff, you know, and, you know, they want to know everything that we're finding, and they do. And but you might have seen in a bunch of those rocks, there's like graffiti. So not, you know, a community is comprised of all different kinds of people, right?
Yep.
And so they feel bad about the graffiti, but it's them doing it. Some of them are doing it, you know, and sometimes they try to wash it off. Other times they let go. There's a lot of trash there. But still, we were there for Bolivian Aymara New Year, which is the solstice, the June solstice, and they party there. That's where they go, and that's where they do their feasting, you know? Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much.